Welcome back to Proxhammer, everybody, and today we're going to be analyzing the 40k April Balance Dataslate. And although the Craftworld Eldar didn't get a change, I do believe that some of the changes indirectly affect the Eldar in a pretty big way. So we're going to be talking about that today, and we're also going to just go through the changes and kind of talk a little bit about what they mean for the game in the last months of 9th edition. But before we do, just a quick overview of today's video. We're going to be doing a full review of the changes made in the latest Balance Dataslate. I'm going to try to keep most of the changes to a minimum and talk mostly about the ones that affect the Craftworld Eldar. And we're going to be obviously talking about how these changes benefit the Craftworld Eldar in competitive play. So here are the main changes, and I actually think that GW did a pretty decent job with this Balance Dataslate. I think obviously, like a lot of players know, they did miss a couple of things. They missed Chaos Demons a little bit, and also, they missed World Eaters because those armies are performing very well in tournaments. But in the case of World Eaters, I kind of think it's okay. And the reason why I kind of think it's okay is because, to be honest with you guys, there's only 2 months left in the edition, and World Eaters just got their Codex. A lot of World Eater players, honestly, are just enjoying their army for the first time in a very long time. And I say just let them enjoy the wins, honestly. I think it's fair. They're going to be getting basically new index in a couple of months. They really haven't had a lot of time to work with their Codex. And I think the last thing you want to do is de-incentivize a lot of World Eater players from even playing in the last couple months with their new Codex. So I definitely think that that's okay. I don't think that's a huge deal. So the first change, which affects Dark Angels, and one that I'm actually happy about, is that there is no more transhuman on Deathwing Terminators. This was an absolutely OP rule that Terminators got when they got their points decreased. So it was okay before because Deathwing Terminators were really expensive, and honestly, they were still really good. You just couldn't afford a lot of them. But with the changes in Arcs of Omen, they became absolutely insane. And when I was playing the local Dark Angels player in my gaming group, basically in 2,000 points, he would have 3 units of these backed up by apothecaries and backed up by librarian support and stuff like that. These guys would be an absolute nightmare to kill. So this is pretty huge, as it makes Deathwing Terminators much easier to kill. And again, it's almost impossible to deal with 30 plus of them in a 2,000 point game without the right tools. However, some people would argue that this nerf went a little bit too far, that they should have changed it to a mini transhuman or something like that. I would actually put forward the point that if they change it to mini transhuman, it would have still felt awful for every Dark Angels player out there, because most weapons that they're going to be targeted with are strength 7 and below anyway. So it really wouldn't have mattered. Outside of a few niche situations like with, weapons that wound on a fixed value of a 2+, would have mattered against that. And basically that's almost it, except for strength 8 weapons and above. So it really wouldn't have been that great anyway. And in addition to that, if GW had given them a mini transhuman and left that rule a little bit in there, then they might have nerfed other stuff. So they might have nerfed Ravenwing units. Or they might have increased the points of Dark Angel Terminators and other Deathwing units. So to be honest with you guys, I think Dark Angels, your Terminators are still good. Thunderhammer Storm Shield Terminators are still one of the most cost-effective, tough units in the game. And with apothecary support and everything like that, they're still going to be very strong on objectives and holding ground. Now you just have to be like every other Space Marine faction out there with their extremely cost-effective Terminators, which, by the way, they're extremely good still. A 1+ armor save and a 4+ invul save is absolutely great, especially when backed up with things, again, like apothecaries and stuff. And Dark Angels do have a psychic power that increases the toughness of your models. So, again, pretty good. I think Dark Angels still have it very good. Your Ravenwing is still very strong. You're just not going to see, Dark Angels players running 30 plus of these Terminators in a list because they're the most OP thing out there. So I actually do agree with the nerf. I know some Dark Angels players might be a little bit upset at it, saying, maybe give them mini transhuman instead. But again, like I said, there would have been a balancing act somewhere. I think GW was just basically, they were convinced into nerfing the whole thing and taking the whole thing out. And this actually makes sense because if I'm not mistaken, just based on some of, peripheral evidence of what they're going to do with 10th edition, I think transhuman as we know it is going to be out the window. I don't think it's going to be a thing. I think it's actually caused a lot of issues in the game rule-wise with conflicting rules and stuff like that, and I think they probably just don't want to deal with that anymore, and I'm thinking transhuman will be changed anyway. The next change was Abhor the Witch is no longer in the Warpcraft category for secondary objectives. So now it shares a spot with Assassination, so opponents can't double up on this for Psyker-heavy armies. So, guess who's a Psyker-heavy army? Craftworld Eldar. We run a lot of Warlocks, a lot of Farseers on our lists, and it was really annoying in certain matchups that your opponent would just be able to pick Assassinate and Abhor the Witch and score a bunch of points for killing some of your Warlocks. So, yes, in these games, was that always a big deal? No, because sometimes your opponent just wasn't able to kill them anyway with things like Quicken and stuff. But in some matchups, your opponent would be able to target these characters pretty reliably, and a lot of your characters would die, especially your Warlock units. And this just counted for all Psykers. So even units like regular Warlocks would be the subject of Abhor the Witch. So again, I think it's obviously matchup dependent, but I think this is a good change. Although I would have preferred a change of the secondary itself. Instead of changing its category, I would have just changed what it is. I would have made it something based on how many psychic tests you deny. Maybe you score 2 points for every psychic power you deny in a game. I actually think this would add a lot more flavor to the secondary objective. Instead of just kill psychers, how about deny their psychic powers, right? Every successful deny again scores you 2 victory points. I think that would have been a great change, but again, I think GW is keeping it simple here. They just moved the category because obviously they didn't want people double dipping on Assassination and Abhor the Witch. So Genestealer Colt also got a nerf to one of their secondaries, Brood Swarm. Now it's capped at 3 victory points per turn, so they can't score an insane amount of victory points every turn for controlling the board, which Genestealer Colt has the speed and has the expendable units to do so almost every single game. So now they're going to have to keep up the board pressure for longer than a couple turns and actually have to play the game like everybody else to score this secondary objective. Now, I'm going to just be honest and real with you guys. I have zero experience actually playing with Genestealer Colt. It's one of the few armies that I've not played against just because no one in our group plays it and it's very hard to find a pickup game against someone who actually plays this army. So I haven't had a real game against this army. I've done some theory crafting against them. I've done some other things like that, looked at their rules, but I haven't actually played them. So I really don't have firsthand experience of how oppressive this secondary objective was, but just based on certain lists that I've seen online and based on what other people have told me and also just the rule itself, I think this is a good change. And however, I do not think it's going to change certain Genestealer builds from quickly overwhelming elite armies. So I think elite armies are still going to have a lot of trouble with these guys. These guys are still going to be very strong with the recent points reductions they got in Arcs of Omen, but I do think they're going to be a little bit more manageable on the objective front. Imperial Guard had their Relic Banner and Overcharged Last Cell stratagem nerfed. The OP Banner Relic, and again, this thing was pretty OP. I didn't really know how OP it was, even when I was playing against my Imperial Guard opponent when he just got his hands on the new Codex, because he wasn't even fully aware of how OP it was himself, to be honest. And I think it's one of those banners, honestly, that was so overtuned, something needed to change with it. So both allowing all core units within a certain range, I think it was 6 inches, to ignore hit modifiers, as well as being able to ignore wound caps, was something that was basically an auto take in every single list. So, and by the way, hit modifiers include things like dense cover and things like lightning fast reflexes. So if you had any of these, you'd lose them. So I think, basically no longer ignoring hit modifiers is a pretty good change, and it still ignores wound caps. So that's, in my opinion, what makes the banner pretty good. And I think that still being able to ignore wound caps on things like Phoenix Lords, things like, Gilliman and stuff like that is still very cool. Overcharged last cells being nerfed, having its mortal wounds capped at 6 maximum. I've talked about this during the last Balance Dataslate about things that I hope would happen. And I'm glad it finally did happen because honestly, it was a clear oversight by GW. There's no way they intended for this, and I'm glad that they nerfed it, basically. So it's a good thing they nerfed it. Little too late. They probably should have noticed this way earlier, to be honest with you. But I'm glad they at least did something about it. So they're not basically deleting 3 units out of your army with little trouble at all. And again, both are still really good. I think the Barbican's key combo with the Kasserkins is still going to be very effective in a lot of different ways. You're just not going to be able to delete everything you target. You're going to have to probably, instead of picking 3 units and deleting them, probably just picking 2 units and deleting them, I think would be that's a fair nerf, I think, for a 100-point unit, to be honest with you. And for the flag, you're still going to want something to be able to deal with wound caps as Imperial Guard because you don't really have an assault phase, so to speak, or a psychic phase to deal with those wound caps, which is obviously why GW put that flag in there, right? So I think that flag is basically perfect as it is. I don't think it ever needed to ignore hit modifiers. And I think these were overall pretty good nerfs and pretty balanced and fair nerfs. Codex Warfare was nerfed. Now, this is actually very good. Now, what this means is that most Marine armies, you're going to see them scoring less points on objectives throughout the game unless they're actually winning the game, right? Because before, I'd have games against, Ultramarines or even just Iron Hands or something like that, where they would max this secondary objective by the end of the game, and they would just stay in Devastator Doctrine the entire game, and they wouldn't have to do a damn thing about it, and there was nothing you could do about it. And as long as they killed 7 or 8 units with Devastator Doctrine with heavy weapons, which in certain armies was basically their whole army, and that's what they were built around, there was nothing you could do to prevent those points from being scored. And even in games which they lost, they were still scoring points on this. So I think maxing the victory points of 5 added to each category, so 5 max for tactical, 5 max for Devastator, and 5 max for assault, makes tactical doctrines, or doctrines in general, just a lot more strategic, right? Marine players are now going to have to actually build their armies around different things, around assaults, around, just firing with regular bolters, and as well as firing with heavy weapons. They can still do that. They can still score 5 points on it, just can't score the full 15, which I think is a good change. And it certainly makes Iron Hands and Dark Angels a bit less problematic in Devastator Doctrine. Now they actually have to switch to other doctrines and, basically play the game like every other faction out there, which is, you have to do different things. You can't just sit there and just kill units and max out your points. That's never a healthy system in what we have now in 9th edition. And speaking of Space Marines, Deathwatch secondary objectives and doctrines were buffed. Now they have an easier time scoring on their secondary objective, which is you kill a unit of each battlefield role. Now you score more points for it, which is pretty good. And doctrines can also be changed each turn. So before they couldn't change the doctrines as easily, and now they can, which is really cool. So were these changes enough to make Deathwatch a viable tournament army? Probably not. But I also think that Deathwatch may have some tricks up their sleeve now. They might have some options to be able to get some points in a game. And I think, it probably won't bring them to a top faction, but it might bring their percentages up quite a bit. It might actually do that, right? So, again, I don't know. I have a buddy in my gaming group who plays Deathwatch, but he doesn't really play them much anymore because they're so weak. So, I don't know how viable they are in tournament play. Probably not by much because they have such a low win rate. But then again, this might boost them up to maybe 41%, 42%, still below what GW wants them to be, but who knows? Deathwatch aren't an army I know much about, so I don't know. I don't know what kind of units they really have or anything like that, but I'm hoping this is a good improvement. Honestly, just looking at the Codex Warfare part of it, well, not the Codex Warfare secondary objective. I didn't really mean to say that, but, their objective that allows them to kill different battlefield roles and still score 5 points. I think it's 5 points per battlefield role, which is pretty good. Tyranids are getting their adaptive rules back and no longer lose synaptic imperatives when their Hive Tyrant dies. So now they can pick adaptive traits based on the opponent. I think this is a flavorful change, and I never had a problem with this. I thought that was really cool kind of ability that they had. The fact that they got rid of it kind of seemed weird, but then again, Tyranids were so overtuned in so many different ways that I can understand the initial nerf on this. Especially for competitive play, it may have felt like this was just allowing units to be even more powerful, because remember, at the time, their units were absolutely insane. Also, killing the Hive Tyrant doesn't disable synaptic imperatives. I think this was probably one of the biggest nerfs, because basically you had to pick your Hive Tyrant as your warlord, and obviously you would want to start it on the battlefield, and if you did, and if it was killed, you lost the synaptic imperatives rule for your entire army. So this was actually really bad. This basically meant that within the first couple turns of the game, if your opponent had the tools to deal with the Hive Tyrant, you wouldn't be getting your synaptic imperatives. Which, by the way, I've had some games against Tyranids when this nerf was in effect, and it was pretty bad, I have to admit. Turn 2, my opponent would have to come out with this Hive Tyrant and do something, or else you're just wasting your points on a model of that high value. And then you just hit it with D cannons, or you hit it with fire dragons or something like that, or just fire prisms or whatever, and the thing dies, and then you lose the ability for the entire army. I think that's pretty lame. I honestly don't understand why that was. So, in my opinion, as long as you have a synapse creature on the field, you should be able to use it, because that's how the hive mind works. So it didn't really make sense, the nerf. I know they did it because of, really high numbers that Tyranids were putting up, but I'm glad it's back. Because, to be honest, these are good buffs that make sense and don't make Tyranids OP. They just make playing the army feel a little bit better and feel a little bit, better to handle. Easier to handle, I should say. As for our Dark Eldar cousins, they're getting the core keyword back on their Talos and Chronos. They can now be buffed by certain durability auras and certain stratagems, which is very cool. I think this is a good change. I don't know, to be honest with you, I know why they took it off in the first place, because it was extremely overpowered in combination with a lot of the other things that Dark Eldar had at the time. But now that those things are generally gone and the game's a lot more lethal, I don't think this is a very bad change. I think it's pretty good, and we'll probably see a return of more of these in Dark Eldar lists. Tau broadsides also gained the core ability, so this is a pretty powerful buff considering the types of buffs that can be handed out to core battlesuit units and the kind of auras that exist in the Tau army. You're definitely going to see more of these included in Tau lists once again, and this is kind of annoying. I really didn't like broadsides. I thought they were to be honest with you, a very OP unit when the Codex first came out. A lot of people were talking about crisis battlesuits, but the amount of firepower that broadsides could level at you from a huge distance was absolutely insane. And, broadside battlesuits, the thing about them is they have increased range, so they don't have to get close to you. They can just stay back and shoot, and then they can use the fire and fade ability to just go in and out of, terrain. Or it's not fire and fade. I think it's called strike and fade for them. But, it didn't feel very good. I think having core on these guys might actually be kind of annoying. And also the fact that, the weird thing is that the Tau weren't really a race that was suffering from any kind of power creep or any kind of, tournament, failure at all. I mean, they were at 48%, which is pretty good. That's higher than Eldar. So I'm not really sure why they got this buff, to be honest with you, but hey, they got it. Broadsides gained core again. No clue why. I don't think they needed it. I think they were okay as is. Obviously, in competitive lists, they were outcompeted by crisis suits because crisis suits can benefit from a lot of weird and strong, powerful combinations, and now broadsides can too. So, I don't know. This might not be a big deal, but I think it's kind of annoying. Okay, so how did these changes benefit the Craftworld Eldar in competitive play? So there's a couple of them that I think indirectly buff the Craftworld Eldar and will make us stronger in competitive games. So one thing is obviously the Deathwing nerf helps out all of our shuriken cannons and scatter lasers deal with the Terminators as well as fixed wounding weapons. So things that wound on a 2+, things like witch blades, things like singing spears and stuff, it's really going to help those weapons out a lot. And honestly, when I was playing against Dark Angels, there was a lot of games where I felt that my units were just hitting an unkillable target dummy like in World of Warcraft. You know those target dummies in the capital cities that no matter how many times you hit them, they're just going to return to full health in a couple seconds? That's how I felt with them, right? You kill 2 Terminators, and 2 of them pop back up with an Apothecary and the healing stratagem. It's kind of ridiculous, to be honest. Especially if they had transhuman with them and they had other buffs on them, they were just really hard to remove, almost impossible unless you had some specialized tools, like Harlequins, for example. Harlequins were one of those units that could actually deal with Terminators like that. But unless you had some certain tech picks, you weren't going to be able to naturally deal with 30 plus Deathwing Terminators in a game. I also think Abhor the Witch moving categories means that opponents will have to choose between it and Assassinate, and Warlocks and Farseers rejoice. I think this is a good change, again, in general, because it makes it a little bit more difficult for an opponent to pick their secondaries against you, and they won't always just be able to just choose Assassinate and Abhor the Witch and just basically just max out their points if they're having a decent game against a certain build that you have. And I actually think this is a hidden buff to Craftworld Eldar, again, because we like to run a lot of Warlocks and stuff like that to max out our Psychic secondaries, so Warp Ritual, you know, stuff like that, and also just be able to buff our units. So I think this is a very good nerf in general to the stratagem, or excuse me, the secondary objective, Abhor the Witch. Also, Codex Warfare being nerfed is a huge benefit considering how easy Eldar units are to kill, and the cap prevents opponents from capitalizing on one good turn to max points. And again, being able to just stay in one doctrine the entire game and just max out your points with that doctrine was a little bit unintuitive, and I'm glad that they changed this. I think it makes life a lot easier for a lot of armies out there. And it definitely benefits us in a big way, as your opponent is going to have to actually spend a little bit more time thinking about what he wants to do in his list and how he wants to be able to score on the secondary objective. And Eldar units are typically not going to be revealing themselves for the first 3 turns of the game anyway. So again, this makes it a challenge for Marine players to actually be able to just kill everything in a couple turns, and they're only going to be getting 5 points per doctrine. So that's really a good change. Also, the Kasrkin Mortal Wound Bomb nerf is helpful as well. It's still deadly. You still don't want to be on the wrong side of Kasrkins. They have really high AP. They have really high damage with all the stratagems and buffs they can get. But they're just not going to be able to take down your whole army, you know? They're not going to be able to kill your Fire Prism, kill your Wraith Lord, and kill your unit of Rangers in the backfield all in one turn, right? They're going to have to basically do a little bit of target priority, and maybe instead of, again, killing 3 units, they can only kill 2 units or something like that, which I think is also a pretty decent and reasonable nerf. Okay, so in conclusion, I'm pretty happy with the data slate overall, despite GW not touching Craftworld Eldar. So again, we didn't have any changes, which I found kind of weird, to be honest with you. I'm not going to lie. I found it kind of strange because Dark Eldar got a small buff, and we're sitting at about the same win rate as Dark Eldar are. So I didn't understand that. But to be honest, it's all good. We did get indirectly buffed with things like Abhor the Witch and stuff like that. So overall, I guess it's not really that big of a deal. And normally, again, I'd be disappointed, but seeing as no other faction also got point changes, the Dark Reapers not getting a point change and other units in our Codex not getting internally balanced, you know, that's okay. I'm okay with that because no one else got it, so why would the Craftworld Eldar be the exception, right? So I'm guessing cost adjustments will just have to wait until 10th edition. And overall, I think the changes to other factions are a pretty big deal in a number of ways and in a good number of matchups. So even though we didn't get directly buffed, it still feels good to have armies like Dark Angels, certain things in Imperial Guard, and other armies just kind of put in check so that we can have a more balanced and easy, or I should say even time, playing in competitive games. Alrighty, everybody, that's going to be it for today's video. I'll see you guys in the next one. Later this week, we're going to have a video coming out on vehicles and how they're going to be in 10th edition. We might also have a video coming out on allies and how they might work in 10th edition based on some of the things GW has said, but we're just going to have to wait a little bit on that because we don't have all the details on Ynnari and also Harlequins. All right, everybody, that's going to be it for today. Thank you so much, by the way, to all of my Patrons for supporting the channel. I appreciate it greatly. And I will leave the Patreon and PayPal links in the description for those of you who want to support the channel a little bit. Thank you so much to all of those who have. All right, everybody, that's going to be it. Peace out. I'll see you guys next time.